So welcome everybody. My name is Anthony Allen. I'm our Assistant Director of Ecological Restoration here at Save the Sound. Annalisa Paltauf is also on the line with us today. Annalisa runs our cleanup program every year and does an absolutely phenomenal job. So I have the honor of really bragging on the results of her hard work and the results of the hard work of all the volunteers and cleanup captains who join with us each year in this effort. So I tried to get clever with the name here. Not sure how effective that was, but we're picking up where we left off. I mean, 2020 was a really extraordinary year for cleanups, and so it's exciting to be able to talk about, sort of the trends and how things have changed from one year to the next. It's 2019, 2020, now 2021. So I'll jump in here. For those who are not as familiar with Save the Sound, we're a regional environmental nonprofit organization. We lead environmental action across the Long Island Sound region. That is Connecticut, Westchester County, New York, the Bronx, Queens, and the North Shore of Long Island. That is sort of our area. It's defined largely by the bulk of the watershed of Long Island Sound that drains into Long Island Sound. And we lead environmental action in a number of ways. We protect endangered lands. We patrol and watchdog on water quality and monitor for water quality. We fight and advocate for climate change adaptation, and we work with nature and natural ecosystems to restore their function and to restore the mutual thriving of those ecosystems in our communities. I'm so sorry about that. That was somebody on my street is not happy. Okay. So the cleanup effort that we're talking about here today, we call it the Connecticut cleanup. That is our effort within the state of Connecticut, across the entire state of Connecticut. We've coordinated this since 2002. And so this year, upcoming 2022, is actually going to be our 20th year doing this work, and really excited about that. But it is part of the International Coastal Cleanup effort. And the ICC, or International Coastal Cleanup, is an effort run by the Ocean Conservancy. It's a global effort, and it is the largest volunteer day of action every year in terms of cleaning up. They get hundreds of thousands, if not a million or more volunteers out. Historically, it has centered on a single day that they call International Coastal Cleanup Day. And we generally organize our efforts and have the bulk of our cleanup events on that day. They're sort of moving more, I think, toward sort of a month-long recognition or month-long effort. We have been doing that for quite some time. We actually stretch over several months. So you'll see this is what we call cleanup season. Our sponsor last year and also the 2 years before, I believe, SUBARU of New England, really grateful for them coming back and continuing to support this work. But you can see, this is the beginning of what I was talking about here, the difference between 2020 and 2021. We did the same kind of graphic in last year, to show the difference between 2019 and 2020. And really the story here is that 2021 was a rebound back to what we're sort of more accustomed to in terms of our in-person events and the numbers that we see in terms of turnout and the trash that we are able to remove. 2020 was an incredibly impressive effort by a lot of volunteers. We were thrilled to have 1,500 people participate in that over 3 months. One key thing we want to note, though, especially since we're talking about data and trends today, is that there were 41 cleanups that we sort of counted in 2020. That does not include a single individual going out with the CleanSwell app, which the Ocean Conservancy has put out and that we encourage people to use. That does not include those folks who just went out solo or in pairs to clean up in their local area. And so the numbers in 2020 are a little bit murkier than they are in other years. We did see more folks use the CleanSwell app this year at the actual cleanup sites for our cleanup events. But in those cases, they're basically using that in lieu of a paper card, and they're still counted as part of that same cleanup event. So just wanted to note that. But we had a record actually this year of 76 cleanup events. That is a record, I believe, all time for us for this effort. And we removed more than 4 tons of trash over the 3 months, and about the same number of volunteers as we had in 2019, actually. 24, I think there was 2,500 in 2019. A couple of things to just keep in mind as we're talking today and as we're going through the data and trends. In 2020, the Ocean Conservancy made the decision to create some new categories, including for gloves and masks. PPE, as we know, is pretty much everywhere, personal protective equipment. They also created one for beverage sachets and one for e-cigarettes. Those we only have data on starting in 2020 as a result of that. And then also they made the decision to combine several categories. And you'll see those here as well. And those are sort of amalgamations of what used to be separate categories. And so that does have an impact too on the data for those categories and the way that those are being counted. So I wanted to note that. This is the other big consideration, which I alluded to before. We were in person exclusively in 2019. We were moved to a hybrid format in 2020, where we had a lot of virtual cleanup events, as well as some in person. And then this year we were back mostly in person. I'm sure there were several people that went out and did cleanups on their own. But to my knowledge, I don't think we had any official virtual cleanup events in 2021. So when we're thinking about the data, again, it's a little harder to adjust the data. We tend to adjust by the data for the number of cleanup events that happened that year so that we can get a sense of how it's breaking down on a per site basis. And it's not just sort of, well, there were more cleanup events, so there was more trash in every category. So we adjust that way. And so that change in format in 2020 does have an impact on that. It's a little hard to characterize what that is. Okay, one of our favorite things to say is that trash travels. It's true. It can travel a very, very long way, depending on what type of trash we're talking about. And so we don't have to all come down to the beach and clean up. It doesn't all end up there, and it certainly doesn't all start there. And so over the past several years, we've been really working on cultivating some interest in this and some more cleanup events in inland communities, upstream communities, to catch the plastic and the other trash where it is up there, maybe closer to the point of origin. Can't say that for certain, but certainly further away from the sound. So you see on the map here, a bit more of a distribution this year, moving up through Hartford County and a little bit more in Middlesex County. But I wanted to just pull out some accolades here. This is based on CleanSwell data. So that, again, that's the app. So this is not showing folks who use paper cards or cleanups that only have people using paper cards. But based on this data, which I believe is about, it's about a quarter of our total data and our total participation this year is reflected on this map and in CleanSwell. The most volunteers that used the app were in Fairfield County, and not surprisingly, the most trash recorded in Clean Swell was also in Fairfield County. That is different than last year. So we saw a whole bunch of people down in the Fairfield area using the app this year. Okay, high level, look at what we found this year. Perhaps not surprisingly, but this is the second year in a row that plastic pieces, so small pieces of plastic, generally under 2 centimeters, took the top spot. It was the most found item. It was, for the first time last year, it overtook cigarette butts, which historically have always been the #1 item found. And now you can see there's actually a pretty, it was almost 50% more plastic pieces were found than cigarette butts this year, nearly 25,000 in this year alone. So this is really concerning, and it's something that we're definitely keeping an eye on and making note of. But it's also one of the things that it's harder to kind of nail down the source. Cigarette butts, we know what they are, we can identify them, and we can try and figure out at least where they came from. The other item that was we found more of this year, at least in terms of total number, than we have any other year in the past, food wrappers, more than 10,000. And that actually, I believe, was also consistent, or something that the Connecticut River Conservancy, who also they do their source to sea cleanup, which is the whole Connecticut River watershed. I believe they also saw a lot of that this year too. Foam takeaway containers, actually that's down, the foam takeaway containers. And, it may be reflective of some changes in packaging preferences, or at least the result of continuing consumer preferences and pressure. And there's been bills and pressure in the legislature in Connecticut around banning polystyrene containers like this. So it's possible that some places are just being more proactive, and we are seeing a drop there. Gloves and masks, found more of this than we did a year prior. Not surprising, we're all still using gloves and masks, and I mean, perhaps less gloves than masks. It'd be interesting to see how that category breaks out. And then plastic bags. This is one I'll talk more about later, but the plastic bag ban in Connecticut for single-use plastic bags at the point of sale, that became fully effective as of July 1st of last year. And so we're continuing to watch that category and see how that has an impact. All right, I'm going to dive a little bit into some of these in a little bit more depth, and just show you the profile of the trend line here. For cigarette butts, they're decreasing on a per cleanup basis. That's what you see here. They spiked a little bit in 2019, but really they've been on a general downward trend. It doesn't mean that we're getting all of them at these cleanup sites. I think I've seen it at least a few times where people just get sick and tired of picking up cigarette butts, and they want to move on and try and find other things. So that's not necessarily to say that there are less cigarette butts out there, but we are picking up less of them, finding less of them perhaps. They are still among the most ubiquitous, and they are highly toxic, not just because they are plastic themselves and have the possibility of degrading into small plastics, but also because the chemicals that are captured in the filters are incredibly toxic and can release into the water. Plastic pieces, again, we talked about this. It's hard to target this a little bit because it is a catch-all category. Any kind of small plastic that's found gets put into this category. That said, it has been steadily increasing the past 4 years. You can see that really the past 5 years. And it's a cause for concern because you know, they're hard to find, and once they get small enough, they're just out there, and we're not realistically going to get them back. So trying to focus more upstream on you know, bigger plastics that will eventually break down into these small plastics is one way of addressing this. What we're not talking about here, I should note, is microplastics. Microplastics are too small for us to be walking around on a beach and picking those up. But microplastics are a cause for a lot of concern, a lot of study and research right now in terms of their effect on humans and on wildlife. And these small plastic pieces, if we don't get them, like I said, they'll get even smaller and they'll become microplastics eventually. Takeaway containers, you can see the difference here. Plastic and foam both dropped this year from 2020, roughly returned to pre-pandemic levels from 2019. And this may have had something to do with the fact that, you know, summer into fall of 2021, we actually had really low cases and people were out eating in restaurants again. I think part of the reason that we think we saw the spike in 2020 is that a lot of restaurants were closed for most of that year, or were only doing takeaway. And so we may have seen a spike due to that. But that lifestyle shifted again in 2021. Fishing gear, this is one of those combined categories. So this includes fishing line, abandoned traps and pots, old netting, that kind of thing. And we put this on here and we keep an eye on this because it's a huge risk to marine life. Everything from entanglement to choking and becoming ensnared, all of this. So we keep this on here and we keep an eye on it. One thing to note, even though the category as a whole dropped and has been dropping the past couple of years, fishing line was one of only a very few categories that actually increased this year from 2020. And it was the category that increased by the most, about 20% increase on that one. So this is another one that we can target, and we can, you know, try and work with recreational fishermen and the commercial industry. And folks don't want to be losing lines. It's not cut on purpose, and the nets can come from just about anywhere. So this one's not straightforward, but it is a high risk category. Strapping bands, major threat to wildlife, again, especially if they're not cut and they remain sort of intact. And we saw a huge increase in this in 2020. Again, at the time we were speculating, and again, none of this is causation. We can't draw causality from this, but we can note correlations and line them up, or try to line them up with what's happening in our world and in our society at the time. So strapping bans, we saw a huge increase from 2019 to 2020. We think that may have been due to just the sheer volume of packages that people are ordering to their homes. E-commerce went way up as retail was not really an option, or didn't feel like a safe option in 2020. That came back down some, but not all the way in 2021. And so that kind of makes some sense with that narrative, given that retail has rebounded, and we are at least previous to Omicron, and this is when all of this was happening. Have to remind ourselves, this was 2021. All the cleanups were done by the time Omicron really hit. So we were shopping again, and people were still relying on e-commerce a lot. So that's one of the things that we were speculating about on that category. Food wrappers, again, I noted the huge increase in these. These are sort of insidious because they're small enough to pose a choking hazard or to be ingested by marine wildlife or birds. Birds will sometimes carry these back, especially if they're shiny, to their nests. They are very light, very easily transported on water or on the wind, so they can move a great distance from where they're disposed of or thrown on the ground. And 2021 again was the 5-year high for the gross number of these that we found. Last category I'm going to dive into deeper here is plastic bags, and this is one, that we've been paying a lot of attention to, not least because of the single-use plastic bag ban in the state of Connecticut, where we're doing these cleanups. And you can see here on the chart, there's separate categories on the data card and in CleanSwell for plastic grocery bags and other plastic bags. And so I put them both on here and we've totaled them. You can see, I mean, as far as the plastic bags that are actually targeted by the ban, they are bags that are less than 4 mils in thickness. So thin bags that you would get at checkout, specifically at point of sale at like grocery stores or retail stores. And you can see the timeline here, and we can try and track this against the progression of our findings, that the 10-cent fee, which was meant as like a lead-in to the full ban, the 10-cent fee on these bags went into effect August 1st, 2019. So just before this cleanup season in 2019. And that remained in place continuously until March 2020. In March 2020, it was paused due to COVID. I think there was a thought at the time that single-use plastic was somehow safer. We didn't know what we didn't know, I think, about COVID and the way it was going to be transmitted, and the safety of various bags or solutions where this is concerned. So that was paused for about 3 months, and then it was reinstated in time for the 2021 season. But again, we did see a big spike in all plastic bags in 2020, and part of that may have been the data considerations that I referenced earlier in terms of number of cleanups, which is how this data is adjusted. But part of it may also just be that stores went back to plastic bags, or consumers were still choosing plastic bags. And you have to keep in mind too that the full ban was still not in effect, and 10-cent fee may not have been enough to dissuade many or most people. And then finally, in 2021, just before the cleanup season started last year, the full ban on single-use plastic bags went into effect. Now, it's worth noting that some stores like Walmart and others, I'm sure everyone has seen this, have not done away entirely with plastic bags. They've just made thicker plastic bags that are thicker than 4 mils and are offering those at point of sale as reusable plastic bags. But the promising thing is that, in 2021, I believe I had read that we went from an average of 10% of customers bringing their own bags to the store to roughly 90%. And it makes sense. It's not a huge lifestyle change once you've made it. And if you forget now, you're very unlikely to see plastic bags at checkout. So we'll see. We'll keep an eye on this category going forward. It'll be really interesting to see how this full ban really impacts the data in coming years. So we care a lot about plastic. It's our number one focus at Save the Sound when it comes to these cleanup efforts. And there's a lot of different categories of trash on the card and in the data that are plastic. Everything from cigarette butts to plastic bags. And the reason we care so much about this is that, plastic doesn't disappear. It doesn't go away. It stays with us in our environment. And I remember hearing it said that, if you fast forwarded 1,000 years and just hypothetically, humans were no longer here, our plastics would still be here. There would be a layer of them coating the ocean floor that would be geologically significant. So something to keep in mind and to drive you. But it is a regional issue largely. Again, these things can travel a long distance. We've all heard of like the Great Pacific Plastic Patch and other things. They can travel a long, long way. But for the most part, we're looking at this as a regional issue, and you can see the region as we know it and talk about it over here on the map. And it stretches, thanks to the Connecticut River, it stretches all the way up to Canada. And so hypothetically, I know one of the things our soundkeeper, Bill Lucy, likes to say is, someone driving on a road in Quebec could flick a cigarette butt out the car window. It could go down a highway drain into the local waterway, into the Connecticut River, and be carried all the way down to Long Island Sound, end up on a beach near you. So again, trash travels, and plastics in particular tend to be light, very transportable, and they never go away. They just break down and down and down into smaller pieces. So how do we start to address this? Advocating for local, state, and federal funding for cleanup efforts, but also for other solutions in river or in our communities to help capture plastics or divert them. Policy and industry practices to reduce the sources. So this is, it's related to the next point about circular economy. If there's ways that we can use different materials that actually do biodegrade or can disappear, or can be reused effectively, then that's the way we want to go in most cases. And an example of this would be the rise, others may have noticed this too, the rise in like mushroom containers for packaging, where it's actually made out of mycelium, and it will just break down naturally. So, or it can be composted. So there are options here. There are things we can do. The personal action piece of this, there's about 100 different versions of this now, but I still generally will use the 4 R's: refuse, reduce, reuse, and if all else fails, recycle. So what are we watching in 2022? Well, there's a key effort going on right now. The Long Island Sound Marine Debris Action Plan is being developed. It should be finalized in the spring. And that really has 3 goals focused on, the impact of single-use plastics and other consumer debris, both understanding it, where it comes from, how it moves, and what it's made of, and also preventing and mitigating its impacts. Also, abandoned or lost fishing and aquaculture gear. If anyone's heard of ghost fishing, this is something that our soundkeeper is really attuned to and is working on. Ghost fishing is when fishing gear like traps or lobster pots are abandoned on the sea floor or on the sound floor, and they continue to fish. And wildlife moves into them, gets caught, dies in there, or something else comes in and eats it and then gets trapped, and so on and so forth. And there are a lot. I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but it's many, many thousands of these sitting on the bottom of the sound. And then finally, a focus on microplastics and microfibers. I mentioned earlier that microplastics can come from larger plastics breaking down more and more and more until they're nearly invisible and they're classified as microplastics. They can also be, find their way in as microplastics or as microfibers. And this is like polyester clothing. When we wash it, that can wash microfibers directly into the waterway or into the sound. Key policies and just things that we're looking at and we'll pay attention to in the legislative session this year. Polystyrene bans, we have seen a general decrease in foam, at least in certain categories of foam, which is promising, but the legislative side of things has a chance to catch up to that and to the consumer choice and make that official. Continuing the impact of the full single-use plastic bag ban, it just really came into full effect. So we expect to see lagging impacts of that. And if we don't, then it means that perhaps the ban is not targeting enough, or it's not broad enough to really be making a big impact. Other policies targeting single-use plastics, love to see across the board reduction, if not ban, on single-use plastics. And then again, the implementation of climate adaptation bills that were passed in Connecticut in 2021. These were a lot of the governor's top bills last year. They can fund things, including green infrastructure, like bioswales in the right-of-way on our streets, that are an example of a natural infrastructure that can capture plastics that are washing down our roadways during rain. And as we move into the 2022 season, which will really begin probably in about August, although corporate cleanups and company cleanups we do throughout the spring as well with folks. But the season will really kick into gear in August, and we encourage folks to sign up to be a cleanup captain. Especially, I want to put a word out for youth leaders. This is a real way to build some leadership skill, to practice organizing, and get some experience organizing events that have a real impact and bringing your community together. And honestly, I don't think anyone really does that better than our youth can. So if you're a high school student or you want to work with a parent and set one of these up, please do reach out to Annalisa. Her email is right here on the screen. Also, want to put a plug in for inland communities. Again, if you live in an inland community and you didn't see a dot on that map I showed earlier, or even if you did, please reach out. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to get a cleanup going on in your community this year. 4 R's, we already talked about this. Just keep practicing that and support the policies and policymakers that are creating or attempting to create solutions to address this problem. And that's it, folks. That's all I've got. And so would love to take any questions if there are questions.
Oh, hi, this is Ed Paulak. I live in West Hartford. Thanks very much. This is a really interesting presentation. My wife and I are members of Save the Sound. I was wondering if, and maybe I came in a little bit late, I was wondering if you normalize the data to account for differences from year to year in cleanup effort. So I wonder if you could speak to that.
Yeah, it's a great question, Ed. And thank you for supporting our work. We do that. We do it on the basis, we adjust based on the number of cleanup events that happen that year. One of the things that I was mentioning early in the presentation is that, that works well, except for maybe 2020 was difficult where that was concerned, because there were a lot of folks going out with the app on their own and cleaning up, and that data was counted, but that was not counted as a cleanup event. And so, that could skew data in 2020 higher on a per cleanup basis.
I see. Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to say that this is, the cleanup effort has merit just in and of itself, obviously, removing trash from the resource, but it's I had never even thought of it as a way of kind of identifying maybe where efforts to reduce some of these pollutants through legislation? You know, are they having an impact, or identifying pollutants that, you know, perhaps need some consideration? So it seems like it's a two-pronged benefit. So that's really important.
Yeah, it's critically important. And we use this data, and other groups do too, to advocate for legislation, and both locally and at the state level. So we're all indebted to the volunteers who come out for these cleanups and keep close track of all this trash that they're picking up. Because I'll tell you that it's not the easiest thing in the world to walk around and keep meticulous track of everything you're picking up. But I love watching how different groups do it every year. There's always some groups that are just really high functioning, and they're out there and they have a system where they have like 3 people picking up trash and like calling out what they're finding: 3 pieces of plastic, 2 straws, and then someone else is recording it all furiously. It's pretty impressive what people come up with, and we love our volunteers.
Fantastic. Well, my wife and I will look to join a team later this year. Great.
Yeah, I would love to get one up in West Hartford. We actually had one, I think, in West Hartford this year.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ed.
Hi, I don't know if can you hear me?
Yeah, Greg.
Great. Hey, first of all, great information. I'm new to Save the Sound. I just signed up as a volunteer. One of my daughters just signed up as a volunteer. We're out of Scarsdale, New York, but we're longtime boaters on the Sound. And you know, it's funny. Ever since I've been talking to my daughters about this, we're more aware of it. And as I've been getting older, I'm more environmentally aware. Even when I travel down south, etc., I'm in the water, I see something, I kind of stick it in my pocket. And then when you get on the beach, you kind of toss it away in a trash bin. But the plastics, to your point, you know, it just feels like it's increasingly, as your data shows, the big issue. Of course, I mean, there's many, but that seems by increasing in terms of the population of the debris. 2 questions. I guess number one is, I know my daughter who's at school today, she couldn't join this call, but she's looking to study in college next year, environmental studies and oceanography and so on and so forth. So I wanted to share this deck with her. Is this presentation going to be, you know, on your site for access, or how do you distribute that?
Yep. Yeah, we are recording this. We'll sort of edit the recording to clean it up a little bit, and then we'll post it to our website. Yeah, there we have a page on the site called I think it's called our virtual archive. Mm-hmm. So she could check that out.
And secondly, I'm not sure if you have I think you called it a cleanup captain down in the Scarsdale zone, but that would be really intriguing for me and my daughter to learn more about. So I think I jotted Annalisa's email down. She's the woman to reach out to sort of follow up in terms of all of that.
She is, yeah. And I'll mention quickly, Greg, that we are the official partner of the Ocean Conservancy for Connecticut. One of 2, actually. The Connecticut River Conservancy is as well, for their watershed. But in New York, it's the American Littoral Society is the official partner there. We have been talking about doing some cleanup efforts maybe in the spring, you know, earlier in the year, so that we're not, you know, just waiting for the fall to do all this work, and maybe doing some of that in New York. So definitely reach out, and you know, if we can, we'd love to support you in doing a cleanup in your community.
That'd be great. Yeah, I'll shoot Annalisa a note this afternoon, just introducing ourselves to her, and we'll see where it leads.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thanks.
I need to exit this call right now to get back to my day job, but I found this very, very informative, and appreciate the work you guys do.
Great. Thanks, Greg. Appreciate you joining and taking the time.
Thanks.
I have 2 kind of policy questions.
Yeah, go for it, Bill.
The first is, does the state DOT and the towns gather data on what they recover out of the storm drain cleanup system?
That's a great question. I don't know. If they do, I have not seen it.
Okay, I just hopefully the volume of what they get out and properly dispose of is greater than what people pick up along the beaches. Hopefully, if it's effective.
Yeah, and I'm not. Yeah, I definitely haven't seen that data if it exists and if they're tracking it. It would be interesting too if they are to see what how they're categorizing things and how if they're breaking it down or if they're just doing weight. You know.
Yeah, I'm sure they don't break it down in super detail, but
Right.
then
Yeah.
the second question is, does Save the Sound have any advocacy relative to replacement or alternative to the East Hartford trash to energy plant?
That would probably be a question best posed to our climate team.
Okay.
Yeah, I know we're all well aware of it. I'm not sure how that's playing into our legislative priorities or if it is, or if there's any advocacy around that right now.
Yeah, because basically as that goes away, everything we pick up is going to a landfill.
Yep.
And being trucked using
Yeah.
fossil
Ohio
fuels.
or something. It's gone.
Ohio or Pennsylvania.
Yeah. Yeah. It's ridiculous. Yeah. If you, Bill, I'll put my email in the chat. If you want to send me an email about that, I will pass that on to our climate folks.
Okay. I'll get it. It's on the website, right?
My email?
Yeah.
Yeah. I also just put it in chat, but
Okay.
it's
Got
on the
it.
website too. Yep.
I see. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions? These have been great. Okay. Well, in that case, I want to thank everybody for joining. I want to say, if you're not we've heard that from a couple folks that are members here. If you're not a member of Save the Sound, please consider joining as a member. We rely a lot on our members, both for things like our cleanup effort, but also the $25 a year that it costs to become a member is really goes a long way, actually, to support this work and all the other work that we do on restoration, land conservation, climate action, water quality. So please consider becoming a member, donating to the organization, and I hope everybody will consider being a cleanup captain or a volunteer this year as we put that effort together. So thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful afternoon and evening. It's great to see so many of you, and great to be with you today. Thanks a lot.